In 1991, deep in the rugged mountains of West Virginia, a group of miners made an unexpected discovery that would shake the foundations of the small mining town of Dunmore. While working on a new tunnel for a mining project in the Appalachian region, they uncovered something that no one could have possibly predicted: a train. Buried under layers of rock and earth, the discovery was as astonishing as it was puzzling. At first, the miners thought they had come across an old, forgotten tunnel, possibly linked to the region's storied past of railroads that once connected the isolated towns of the area. West Virginia had always been a place where secrets lingered beneath the surface. The mountains themselves seemed to hold memories of the past, waiting to be unearthed. But what they found was something much stranger than they could have ever imagined. The train was large, its rusted metal shell partially exposed, as though it had been buried by time itself. Its carriages, though decades old, were remarkably intact, untouched by the years of earth that had settled on top of them. What struck the miners as odd was that the train seemed to be imperfectly preserved, almost as if it had been waiting there, hidden from the world, for someone to find it. Word spread quickly through Dunmore, and soon the local authorities were called in to investigate the strange find. As they carefully examined the site, more peculiarities began to emerge. The train, despite being buried deep underground, appeared almost untouched by the elements. There were no signs of decay, no cracks in the metal, no obvious signs that the train had ever been exposed to the ravages of time. But what was even more baffling was the fact that the train seemed to be in working order, its engines intact, its wheels still perfectly aligned, as if it could run at any moment. Sheriff Mark Jenkins was one of the first lawmen to arrive on the scene. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a steady hand, he had seen his share of strange occurrences in the small town, but nothing compared to what stood before him now. As he peered into the depths of the tunnel, his mind raced. How could something so large have been hidden for so long? What was it doing here? And who had placed it under the mountain? "I've never seen anything like this in my life," Sheriff Jenkins muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He stared at the rusted train, his brow furrowed. "This doesn't make sense. It's too perfect." As the miners and the sheriff began to search the train for any identifying markers or clues, they discovered something even more unsettling. The train had no markings, no nameplates, and no indication of its origin. There were no signs of a railroad company or any kind of identifying symbol. It was as if the train had been intentionally stripped of its identity, its past erased from history. The only thing they found were faint etchings on the side of one of the carriages, markings that resembled a symbol, one that no one could recognize. The townspeople were buzzing with rumors. What kind of train had been buried under the mountain? Some speculated that it was a piece of forgotten history, a relic from the early days of the railroad. Others believed it could have been part of an underground project buried to keep it out of sight. But the most outlandish theory was that the train wasn't meant to be found at all, that it was connected to something far stranger, something that no one had even begun to comprehend. The discovery sparked a wave of intrigue that would eventually lead to more questions than answers. But for now, all anyone could do was stand in awe of the strange, empty train that sat quietly under the earth, waiting to tell its story, if anyone could figure out what that story was. But as the investigation began, something even more eerie began to unfold. The train, despite being buried for decades, appeared to be capable of running. The wheels turned with ease when touched, and the engine made a faint hum when switched on, almost as if it were waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. Yet there was one chilling detail that left everyone on edge. The train never moved. It ran, it hummed, it seemed alive with energy, but no one had seen it leave the tunnel. The train, it seemed, ran empty. As word of the discovery spread through the small town of Dunmore, the once sleepy town was thrust into a whirlwind of questions, theories, and a strange sense of unease. The train, buried under the mountain for decades, was not just a relic of a forgotten past. It was a symbol of something far more disturbing, something that defied all logic. Sheriff Mark Jenkins, despite his years of experience in law enforcement, found himself struggling to make sense of it all. What he had witnessed that day wasn't something that could be easily explained. A fully intact, rusted train, capable of running yet completely devoid of passengers, sat at the heart of one of the most curious mysteries West Virginia had ever seen. The first step in the investigation was a thorough examination of the train itself. The sheriff, along with his team, carefully combed through every inch of the discovery. The carriages, though weathered by time, were eerily pristine on the inside. There were no signs of decay or abandonment, no signs that anyone had ever traveled on this train. The seats were intact, the floors undisturbed, and the windows clean. It was as if the train had simply been frozen in time, waiting patiently for someone to stumble upon it. But it wasn't just the train's condition that disturbed Sheriff Jenkins. There were deeper questions, questions that didn't have answers. There were no identifying marks on the train, no company name, no number, nothing to suggest where it had come from or who had built it. The more they searched, the less they found. It was as if the train had simply materialized out of thin air. But the strangest discovery was made when they opened the engine compartment. Inside, everything appeared to be in working order. The engine, though old and covered in dust, started up with a soft hum. The wheels turned effortlessly and the gears clicked into place as if they had been maintained despite being buried for decades. Yet there was no sign of how it had been preserved or who had been maintaining it all these years. "Someone has been here," Jenkins muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But who? And why? As the investigation continued, a series of strange occurrences only added to the mystery. A faint glow began to emanate from the train itself, as if the metal was alive, pulsing with an energy that no one could explain. Several miners who had been working near the site reported hearing a low hum coming from underground, as though the train's presence was somehow affecting the very ground beneath them. The town's local historian, Clara DeWitt, was brought in to help make sense of the mystery. Clara was known for her deep knowledge of the area's history, particularly the obscure and lesser-known tales of West Virginia's past. But even she found herself stumped by the discovery. She pored over old maps, records, and documents, but none of them mentioned anything about a train or anything resembling the anomaly they had uncovered. There was no record of a railway being built under the mountain, and no mention of any secret projects in the area. "Nothing," Clara said, shaking her head as she flipped through pages of yellow documents. "There is absolutely no reference to this. It's like it never existed in the first place." That's when a local mechanic named Earl Watson made an offhand comment that caught the attention of everyone involved. Earl had spent years working on old trains and had a deep knowledge of railroad technology. "I don't know much about trains like this, but this engine, it's not from around here. It's something else entirely. The design is old, but it's got features I've never seen. Look at the wiring, the way it's put together. It's like it came from the future or the past." Earl's words resonated with the sheriff. The train wasn't just an old relic. It was something completely out of place, something that didn't belong in the time period it appeared to have come from. But there was one more detail that haunted the investigation, one that no one could explain. A strange pattern of symbols had been etched into the side of the engine. These symbols weren't part of any known language. They appeared almost as if they had been carved in haste, scratched into the metal by a trembling hand. The sheriff ordered a local linguist, Dr. Margaret Pierce, to come take a look. Dr. Pierce examined the symbols closely, her brow furrowed in concentration. These aren't just random markings. There's a method to this, a pattern. But it doesn't resemble any language I know. As the investigation continued, strange reports began to surface. Some claimed to have heard faint whispers or voices coming from the train at night, though no one was ever able to verify these claims. Others said they saw shadows moving near the tracks, figures that seemed to appear out of nowhere, only to vanish when approached. It was as if the train, despite being abandoned, was not truly empty. Every theory proposed so far had failed to explain the train's presence. Was it an artifact from a lost time, hidden away by some secret society or government operation? Or was it something more otherworldly, a relic of an ancient civilization, or perhaps even from another world entirely? No one knew the answers, but one thing was clear. The train was alive in a way that nothing else was. It had waited for decades, maybe even centuries, buried beneath the earth, untouched by time, until the miners had discovered it. And now that it had been found, its secrets began to stir. As the days passed, the mystery surrounding the buried train only deepened. With every new clue uncovered, the theories grew more wild and far-reaching. What had begun as a simple discovery, one that could have easily been explained by a forgotten piece of railroad history, was quickly spiraling into something far more unsettling. The authorities, unable to find concrete answers, turned to the experts. And the experts, one after another, seemed to agree on one thing. There was no rational explanation for the train's presence under the mountain. Something was deeply strange about it, something that made it impossible to ignore. Sheriff Mark Jenkins, who had spent weeks trying to make sense of the situation, felt the pressure mounting. The town had never seen anything like this before. People were talking, rumors were spreading, and everyone had a theory. Most of them seemed outlandish, but each theory contained a sliver of truth, a kernel of possibility that only seemed to complicate the investigation further. The first theory to gain traction was the idea that the train was part of a secret military project from the 1940s or 1950s. West Virginia had always been a hotbed for military activity during and after World War II, with research facilities and secret government projects scattered throughout the state. It wasn't unheard of for the government to bury equipment in remote areas to avoid detection. Some believed that the train could have been part of an underground transportation system built by the military, one that had been hidden away and forgotten when the project was shut down. Colonel Samuel Rhodes, a retired officer with a background in military intelligence, was one of the first to suggest this theory. He had spent years investigating government cover-ups and secret projects, and he immediately saw the potential connection between the train and the many underground bunkers built during the Cold War. This is exactly the kind of thing the government would want to keep out of the public eye, Colonel Rhodes said during an interview with local reporters. If this train was part of a classified project, they would have hidden it. It would explain the lack of markings and the fact that it seems to be perfectly intact. The theory was tempting, but there was a problem. No one could find any official records that supported the idea of a secret train system. The military had denied any involvement, and there were no signs of other projects related to the train in any nearby facilities. Another theory that began to circulate involved the train's eerily well-preserved condition. Some locals were convinced that the train had been placed there by an advanced civilization, long forgotten by time. West Virginia was rich in ancient history. Native American tribes had once inhabited the region, and the mountains themselves held secrets that no one had ever fully understood. Could this train be a relic of an ancient civilization? Had it been buried to protect it from destruction? This idea was championed by Dr. Carol Burnham, an archaeologist with a focus on ancient civilizations. She argued that the train's perfect condition suggested it had been carefully placed underground, almost like a time capsule. We know very little about the early history of this area. The native tribes who once lived here had a deep connection to the land, and it's possible they hid objects of great importance in places that only a few would know how to find. Dr. Burnham's theory was met with skepticism, but it was hard to ignore the inexplicable nature of the train. The idea that it was a relic from a forgotten time had its allure, especially when no other explanation seemed to fit. But the strangest theory, the one that began to gain the most traction among the more conspiracy-minded residents, was that the train was not of this world at all. It wasn't a secret government project, and it certainly wasn't an ancient artifact. It was something extraterrestrial. There were those who believed the train had come from another planet or even another dimension. The train's ability to run without explanation, the hum that seemed to pulse through the earth, and the inexplicable lights that were often seen near the site led some to conclude that it was part of an alien visitation. West Virginia had long been a hotbed for UFO sightings, and many believed that the government had been hiding evidence of extraterrestrial activity for decades. Could this train be part of that hidden truth? "You've got to consider all the possibilities," said Roger Kelly, a local UFO enthusiast and self-proclaimed expert on alien activity. "This train is too perfect. There's no way it should be here. And the fact that it runs, but runs empty, I think it's a message. It's not just a train. It's something far bigger. Maybe it's a vessel from another world, a ship that's been abandoned." Kelly's theory was far from accepted by the authorities, but the idea of the train being connected to alien life persisted in the local gossip. There was something haunting about the way the train ran on its tracks, empty and alone, as if it had been left to wait in the mountains for something or someone. And then, just as the theories were beginning to spin out of control, another strange event occurred. A group of amateur investigators, armed with nothing more than their curiosity and a desire for answers, made their way to the site of the train one fateful evening. They set up cameras and equipment to document the train's mysterious activity. And to their shock, they recorded something that could not be explained. For just a few moments, the train moved, slowly at first, but then with increasing speed, as if it were being guided by an unseen hand. The wheels turned, and the engine roared to life, but there was no one aboard. The train ran in circles, like a machine without purpose, until it suddenly came to a stop. The footage was brief, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the community. The train had moved, and it had done so without a driver, without any apparent source of power. Now more than ever, the question remained: what was this train? And why was it running, empty, and yet alive? The footage of the train moving on its own had sent a shockwave through the town, sparking an even greater wave of speculation. The authorities, unable to explain the event, became more tight-lipped, and the once quiet town of Dunmore found itself at the center of a growing storm of mystery, theories, and unanswered questions. Yet, for all the wild speculation, one thing had become undeniable. The train was not just an artifact of a forgotten past. It was something far more complex and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Sheriff Mark Jenkins, who had once believed that the train might simply be a relic of a long-gone era, now found himself questioning everything. The train's movement, the strange energy it emitted, and the bizarre symbols etched into its metal all pointed to something beyond human understanding. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a warning. But a warning from whom? And for what purpose? The night after the train was seen moving on its own, a series of new, terrifying events began to unfold. The town's power grid started acting strangely. Lights flickered and dimmed, and a constant low hum filled the air, coming from somewhere deep within the mountain. Residents who lived near the site of the train began reporting strange occurrences. Electrical appliances malfunctioned, phones went dead, and some even described seeing shadowy figures moving in the trees. Figures that vanished as soon as they were noticed. Sheriff Mark Jenkins knew it was time to take action. He called in more experts, hoping they could shed light on the growing mystery. Among the new arrivals was Dr. Evelyn Hartman, a scientist specializing in electromagnetic fields and unexplained phenomena. Dr. Hartman had heard about the train's strange abilities and was eager to examine it. Her team set up several instruments around the train, hoping to detect any unusual energy signatures. What they found was beyond their wildest expectations. The train, despite being buried for decades, was emitting an electromagnetic field so powerful that it could interfere with electronic devices for miles around. The readings were off the charts, indicating that the train was somehow generating energy that wasn't supposed to exist in the way it did. The field seemed to have an intelligence of its own, responding to stimuli and fluctuating in intensity based on proximity. But even more shocking was what Dr. Hartman discovered when she examined the symbols on the side of the train. They weren't just random carvings, they were mathematical equations, ancient symbols intertwined with complex geometries. As she delved deeper, it became clear that these markings weren't just decorative. They were instructions, a blueprint of sorts, for how the train operated. "They're coordinates," Dr. Hartman said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "These symbols, they're not just symbols. They're instructions for how to access something hidden beneath this town." The realization hit like a thunderclap. The train wasn't just a transportation vessel. It was a key to something buried deep under the mountain. What that something was, no one could say for certain, but the implications were staggering. Whatever had been hidden in the mountain all these years, whatever the train had been guarding, was now within reach. But as the team prepared to dig deeper into the mystery, something far more disturbing occurred. Late one night, as the investigation continued, a strange figure appeared near the train. It was cloaked in shadow, moving silently between the trees. And though no one had seen its face, there was something unmistakably familiar about it. Sheriff Jenkins, who had been working late that evening, felt a shiver run down his spine. The figure seemed to be watching him, but when he looked again, it was gone. The next morning, when Jenkins and his team went to investigate the site, they found something terrifying. The train was gone. Not just moved, it had vanished, leaving no trace, no sign of disturbance in the earth. The tunnel where it had been buried remains, but the train itself was no longer there. The ground around the site had settled, as though it had never been disturbed in the first place. Had someone taken the train? Had it moved on its own? Or was this something far more sinister, an entity that had taken the train and disappeared with it? Dr. Hartman, who had spent hours studying the electromagnetic field, was the first to suggest the unthinkable. "The train isn't just a machine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's part of something bigger, something alive." The idea was chilling. Was the train some kind of sentient being, an ancient artifact with a purpose beyond human comprehension? Had it been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets? And was it now gone, leaving behind only more questions? As the days passed, whispers began to circulate. Some residents claimed that they had seen the train moving at night, speeding through the mountain tunnels and vanishing into thin air. Others spoke of strange dreams where they saw the train running, but always empty, always alone. Sheriff Jenkins knew that the mystery had just become even more dangerous. Whatever the train was, it wasn't finished with Dunmore. And whatever lay hidden beneath the mountain, it wasn't meant to be found. The disappearance of the train left Dunmore in a state of unease that no one could shake. Though the authorities had stopped searching, the town's residents never truly let go of the mystery. The whispers persisted, of the train moving, a figure seen lurking around the tunnels, a strange lights flickering in the woods. Each new sighting added fuel to the fire, yet no one could offer proof. The train, alive with its energy, had vanished, but it had not left the town. It had become a part of Dunmore's legacy, a ghost story that would never fade. For Sheriff Mark Jenkins, the mystery became a personal obsession. He retired a few years after the events unfolded, but even in his quiet home, the question of the train never left his mind. He spent countless nights going over his notes, reviewing the footage, and revisiting the spot where the train had once stood. But every time he returned to the mountain, he found nothing but silence. The train was gone. The tunnel remained empty, and yet the sense of something unfinished gnawed at him. Something still waited beneath those hills. The town had changed. New families moved in, the old stories faded, and life went on, but the whispers never died. The town square, once the center of daily life, became a place for tourists looking for a glimpse of the town's mysterious past. But for the locals, it was a reminder of something that should have been left undisturbed. As the years went by, strange occurrences continued. A few more people claimed to have seen the train moving through the mountain tunnels, even though the tracks were abandoned and overgrown. Others spoke of feeling watched while walking through the woods, an uncanny sense that someone, or something, was always nearby. But one of the most troubling things of all was the growing sense of dread in the town. It wasn't something you could touch, but you could feel it in the air. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the wind would pick up, carrying an electric hum that seemed to come from deep beneath the earth. Sheriff Mark Jenkins, now in his later years, could no longer ignore it. He made one final journey to the mountain, one final attempt to answer the question that had haunted him for so long. What had the train been? And why had it vanished? But when he reached the spot where the train had once been, he found only silence. The trees stood tall, unmoving, as if guarding a secret. And then, just as he turned to leave, the unmistakable sound of metal on track echoed through the air. Jenkins froze. The train, empty, silent, and running, was back. The hum of the engine reverberated through his chest, as if the earth itself was alive with its power. But when he looked toward the tracks, there was nothing. The train was gone again. With his heart racing, Jenkins returned to town, but the experience left him with more questions than ever. He had heard it, felt it, but he knew no one would believe him. It was as if the train was part of the mountain, part of the very land that had concealed it for so long. The mystery of the train, however, did not remain in the shadows for long. As the years passed, rumors about the train's return began to spread. Some claimed that the train would appear again, perhaps when the time was right, perhaps when the world was ready to understand what it truly meant. Others whispered that it was a warning, a force waiting for the right moment to reveal itself to the world, or to the next person brave enough to seek it. And so, the town of Dunmore lived with its mystery, its legend, and its haunted legacy. The train, still running in the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains, remained an enigma, alive but empty, as if it were waiting for someone to unlock its final secret. What lay at the end of the tracks, and who would be the one to uncover it?